The air in the van tasted like metal, gasoline, and the cheap glue from old plywood walls. Every turn threw me sideways. Every bump shoved the zip tie deeper into my wrists. Elena Russo was 24, a pastry chef in Palermo, and she had never been the kind of woman men noticed twice. She came with a simple plan. Work the night order, deliver the dessert, get home before dawn. Until Dante Salvatore stepped into her life with black rosary beads wrapped around one brutal hand and eyes that made silence feel like a sentence. So I stole one breath, unlocked my phone with my knuckle, sent him my location from the dark, and somewhere above me, in a room I couldn't see, the woman who wore his diamonds looked down at my message, glowing on his screen. Then she deleted it. I did not know yet whether Dante Salvatore was the kind of man who came for women like me. I only knew that if he didn't, I was going to disappear before sunrise. The first thing I noticed about Dante Salvatore was not his face. It was the sound, a small, dry click, repeating, steady, almost delicate. Black rosary beads tapped against a man's thumb somewhere beyond the carved walnut study door, while two armed guards pretended not to look at me. I stood in the entrance hall of Palazzo Salvatore with a cake box balanced against my hip and buttercream under one fingernail, wishing I had let my father take the order himself. The house smelled like polished wood, smoke, and winter citrus. It was April, but the stone floors kept the cold the way churches did. Above me, a chandelier burned low and gold. Around me, men in dark suits spoke in Sicilian murmurs so soft they felt more dangerous than shouting. "You're late," the woman on the staircase said. She wore ivory silk and diamonds at midnight. Her mouth was painted the exact red of a fresh cut. I knew her from the gossip pages in bakery line magazines. Bianca Ventresca, the woman Palermo called Dante Salvatore's mistress because the truth was apparently too complicated for civilians. "I'm 2 minutes early," I said before I could stop myself. Her smile sharpened. "Then your watch is cheap." I should have apologized. My father always said rich people were easiest when you let them feel larger than you. But I had been awake since 4, tempering chocolate for a memorial dinner I had not wanted to accept, and I was too tired to fold myself small. Before Bianca could say another word, the study door opened. The room beyond went silent, in the kind of way that made silence feel like a command. Men moved, not much, just enough to create a path. Dante Salvatore stepped into it. He was taller than I expected, broad through the shoulders, black suit, no tie, dark hair brushed back from a face that was not handsome in the soft way magazines liked. It was harder than that. Sharper. A scar nicked one brow. His mouth looked made for withholding. In his left hand, wound once around his fingers, were black rosary beads worn dull with use. The beads clicked softly as he looked at me. Not at the cake. At me. His gaze moved once over my flour-dusted black dress, my white bakery jacket, my sensible shoes. He took in everything without seeming to look at anything for long. That was worse. "This is the Russo delivery?" he asked. His voice was quiet. Low. No wasted sound in it. "Yes." He glanced at the box. "Bring it in." I followed him, because that seemed safer than remaining alone with Bianca's smile. The study was all dark wood, maps behind glass, and one wall of windows opening over the sea. 3 men stood around the desk. Another sat tied to a chair in front of it, with blood running down his sleeve and dripping onto the parquet. I stopped so hard, the cake box slipped in my hands. No one warned me. No one said not to stare. The injured man was young, maybe 30. His breaths came fast and wet. He tried to lift his head when Dante moved, failed, and swore through his teeth. "Again," Dante said. The young man spit blood on the floor. One of the men near the desk cursed and stepped forward. Dante lifted 2 fingers without looking at him. The man stopped immediately. That frightened me more than the blood. "I gave you 1 chance to tell me who bought my shipping routes," Dante said. The man laughed, then coughed hard enough to choke on it. I did not think. I never did when someone was bleeding. I put the cake box down on the nearest sideboard, crossed the room, and dropped to my knees in front of a bound traitor in a mafia boss's study. Someone behind me said, Jesus Christ. The wound was high in the arm, maybe through the bicep, maybe clipped artery if they were unlucky. Blood loss, but not instant death. I dragged the clean linen from the cake box, pressed it hard to the wound, and looked up. Do you have a doctor? The room stared at me. Dante stared the longest. The traitor groaned. Blood soaked through the linen against my palm. I pressed harder. If you want him alive enough to answer, I said, don't let him bleed out on your floor. One of the men barked a laugh of pure disbelief. Another muttered, Madonna. Dante's beads clicked once, then he turned his head. Get Dr. Conti. No one moved fast enough. His eyes did not leave mine. Now. The room exploded into motion. Only then did I realize what I had done. My pulse kicked high and ugly. I looked down at the man under my hands and saw the tattoo on his wrist, the bruises on his jaw. The chair legs bolted for this purpose. I was kneeling in violence like it was a kitchen accident, and my body had not caught up to my brain. You don't know who he is, Bianca said from the doorway. I looked over my shoulder. She had one hand on the frame, expression bored. I know he's bleeding, I said. Something moved in Dante's face. Not softness. Not approval. More dangerous than that, interest. When the doctor arrived, I leaned back on my heels and let him take over. My hands were red to the wrists. Dante crossed the room and held out a folded handkerchief. White linen. Monogrammed. I took it because not taking it felt theatrical. His fingers brushed mine. Cool. Brief. Controlled. What's your name? He asked. Alina Russo. Do you always ignore where you are? My heart was still trying to punch through my ribs, only when someone is dying. A corner of his mouth shifted, not a smile. Something close enough to break the air. He drew a card from inside his jacket and placed it on the sideboard beside the ruined cake box. Creamstock. Black lettering, a number with no name. If anything unusual happens on your way home, he said, you call that number. Bianca made a soft sound behind him. Almost a scoff. I wiped my hands with his handkerchief and said the first foolish thing that came into my head. Do women usually leave your house with emergency instructions? His eyes held mine. No, he said. You're the first. I should have left then and kept leaving. Instead, I looked down at the blood staining his handkerchief and said, you should still save him. The room froze again. The traitor, not me. I saw the exact second the words landed. No one in that room had expected me to ask for mercy twice. Dante's thumb moved over the black beads. Click, click. Then, so quietly I almost thought I imagined it, he said, careful mercy. The name did not sound tender. It sounded like a verdict. I carried the cake back out with shaking hands. Outside, Palermo was all wet pavement and streetlight glare. My father's bakery van waited at the curb. I slid into the driver's seat, locked the door, and pressed my forehead to the wheel until my pulse slowed. Then a shape moved in the side mirror. The back doors jerked open. A hand clamped over my mouth before I could scream. Another yanked me backward so hard my shoulder hit metal. The van smelled instantly wrung rubber, sweat, gasoline, a stranger's breath. I bit someone. Hard, bitch. A slap cracked my head sideways. They zip-tied my wrists, threw me onto flour sacks and empty pastry crates. The van lurched into motion before the doors were fully shut. My phone was in my apron pocket. I rolled, shoulder screaming, dragged it out with both bound hands, and unlocked it with my thumb as the van hit a corner. The screen swam. I found the number from the cream card by memory, not sight. Taken, moving, maybe West Ring Road, please. The van bounced. My message half-typed. I switched to location share instead and hit send. For one strange second, relief moved through me, thin and stupid and bright. Then one of the men saw the glow. He lunged. I hit send anyway. The phone went flying across the van. A boot crushed it. The back doors slammed, and my old life stayed outside. I woke to linen sheets, a locked window, and the smell of antiseptic. For 6 stupid seconds, I thought I had dreamed all of it. Then I moved. Pain flared up my shoulder and across the side of my face where someone had hit me in the van. I opened my eyes to a ceiling painted with faded cherubs and realized I was in a bedroom large enough to fit my father's entire apartment twice over. The curtains were half drawn. Sunlight hit the marble floor in pale stripes. On the bedside table sat a glass of water, painkillers, and my own apron folded square, washed clean of blood. The chair by the window was occupied. Palazzo Salvatore sat there like he had been built out of stillness. Black shirt, dark trousers, no jacket this time. The rosary beads rested loose in his hand, one strand hanging between his fingers. Click, once, then silence. I pushed myself upright too quickly and hissed. "Don't," he said. Anger arrived before fear, which was probably safer for my dignity if not my health. "You came now." His gaze narrowed slightly. "Yes, I sent you my location." Something unreadable crossed his face. "Drink the water." I almost threw it at him. Instead, I grabbed the glass because my throat felt lined with dust. How long was I gone? 12 hours. 12 hours. My stomach turned. Memories came back in fragments. The warehouse. Men shouting. A shot so close it had rung inside my teeth. Dante stepping through a sheet of rain at the loading dock with blood already on one cuff. One of the kidnappers going down before he finished saying Dante's name. Strong hands lifting me. The smell of salt and cold air and something darker under it, his cologne maybe, or just night on wool. "You were late," I said. He did not flinch. Yes. That quiet agreement hit harder than denial would have. I set the empty glass down too sharply. My father? Alive, guarded. The bakery? Closed for now. My phone? Gone. Of course it was. I looked around the room again. Too elegant. Too clean. A prison disguised as a guest suite. There was a bookcase. A private bath. A door I was willing to bet locked from the outside. What am I doing here? Surviving? I laughed once. It sounded awful. Is that what this is? His eyes dropped briefly to the bruises on my wrist. Something in his jaw hardened. You were taken from my curb by men using one of my city routes. Until I know who ordered it, you stay under my roof. That wasn't an invitation. No. The honesty of that should have annoyed me more than it did. I swung my legs over the bed. The room tilted. Dante stood immediately but did not come toward me. He only watched, the way a man might watch a glass near the edge of a table, aware of how easily it could shatter. "I'm leaving," I said. "No. I have work." "No. I have a father who is going to." He already screamed at 3 of my men and threatened to bludgeon me with a rolling pin. I stared at him. The faintest breath of humor touched his mouth and vanished. He is resting downstairs. Something in my chest unclenched against my will. A knock sounded. The door opened before I could answer. A man in a pale suit stepped in, carrying a tray of toast, coffee, and a bowl of sliced blood oranges. He was handsome in a way I distrusted, immediately too polished, too pleased with his own hair. Then he looked at me, looked at Dante, looked back at me, and said, "Good. She's alive. I won 50 euros. Dante did not turn his head. Out. The man sighed theatrically and put the tray down. You see how he is? No gratitude. I spent the whole night rerouting drivers, bribing a magistrate, and being attacked by one of the estate geese. I blinked. Geese? He pointed at his ankle. Savages. They smell fear. And saffron. Maria says it's because I wear expensive shoes. Tommaso, Dante said. Fine. I'm going. But if she needs anything normal, tell her not to ask him. He thinks tea counts as emotional support. He gave me a quick, conspiratorial smile. Tommaso Greco. People I like call me Maso. People who owe me money call me Sir. Then he slipped out before Dante could murder him. In the silence that followed, I looked at the tray and said, He works for you? Unfortunately. The corner of my mouth moved before I could stop it. Dante noticed. Of course he did. He rose at last and crossed the room. Not too close. only enough to set a small paper packet beside the coffee. My father's bakery logo stared up at me from the folded top. My breath caught. He sent cannoli shells, Dante said. Said my kitchen is incapable of ricotta. That one nearly made me cry. I looked down quickly. Dangerous. Stupid. I had known this man less than a day. He kept people in locked rooms and bled truth out of traitors. None of that changed because he had gotten my father's pastry box past armed guards. Why did they take me? I asked. Because someone believed you saw something. I saw a man bleeding in your study. You saw more than that. Maybe I had. Bianca in the doorway. One of the men by the desk with a ring I recognized from the loading dock later. A voice in the van saying, "The boss will pay to get this one back." I hadn't put it together yet. My thoughts still felt broken around the edges. I don't know anything useful. He leaned one hand on the bedpost. The black beads clicked softly in his other hand. That's not the same as being harmless. The words should have chilled me. Instead, I found myself watching his hands. Large, scarred across the knuckles, steady enough to hold silence in place. "You keep touching those like they do something," I said. His gaze dropped to the rosary. For the first time, something closed in him. They remind me. Of what? He looked at me a long moment. That hesitation is expensive. My chest tightened so fast it hurt. My mother in the front seat of my father's car, gray with pain. My father circling the hospital block because men he owed money were outside smoking. Me in the back, screaming at him to stop. By the time he did, she was too far gone. I gripped the sheet. Dante noticed that too. "What happened?" he asked. I shook my head because if I spoke, I would hear how thin my voice sounded. He did not press. Instead, he moved to the door and opened it. "There are guards in the hall. Sofia Belandi will bring clothes. You do not go downstairs without one of my men. You do not use the east stairs. You do not answer unknown numbers if a phone is put in your hand." I hated the way my body listened. "I'm not yours to order." His eyes settled on me. Calm. Implacable. "No," he said. "But you are under my roof, Elena." Then, after the smallest pause, "Eat mercy." The beads clicked once as he left and locked the door behind him. I stared at the oranges until I realized I was holding my breath. Then I let it out and understood, with a sharp, cold certainty, that my normal life was already gone. By the third night in Dante Salvatore's house, I learned two things. First, rich people's clocks were louder after midnight. Second, fear turned me hungry. I stood barefoot on cold kitchen tile at 2 a.m, tying on an apron Sofia had found for me from somewhere in the estate's endless cupboards. The industrial kitchen could have served a hotel. Copper pans hung in perfect rows. The refrigerator doors sealed with a heavy, expensive hush. Beyond the windows, the gardens were silver with moonlight. I had not planned to bake. Then I smelled yeast. That was all it took. Dough listened when men didn't. Sugar obeyed physics. Butter did not lie. In a house full of armed silence, the simplest act of whisking eggs felt like taking my own pulse. So I made maritozzi, soft buns with orange zest and honey, the way my mother had on feast days when we could still afford celebration. My hands stopped shaking when I worked. I was piping cream into the third bun when I realized I was not alone. No sound, no warning, just a change in the room's temperature, as if stillness itself had entered. I looked up. Dante stood in the doorway wearing a dark sweater rolled at the forearms, his jacket gone, the black rosary beads hanging from one hand. He said nothing. Neither did I. The cream bag slipped slightly in my grip. "This is trespassing," I told him. His gaze moved over the flour on the counter, the bowls, the cooling tray. "You broke into my kitchen. You broke into it after me." Something almost human touched his expression. Then he crossed the room. The kitchen seemed to grow smaller around him. He stopped on the other side of the island and looked down at the pastries. "You cook when you can't sleep." It wasn't a question. "I bake," I corrected. Cooking is arrogance. Baking is chemistry. And what is this? Orange blossom honey. citrus zest in the dough, vanilla in the cream. Why that? Because my mother had smelled like oranges in winter, because memory got easier to swallow in pieces, because I had spent 3 days breathing his house and needed one thing in it to belong to me. I shrugged, because bitterness doesn't get everything. His thumb slid over one bead. Click. He reached for one of the buns, paused, and looked at me as if waiting for permission in my own theft of his kitchen. That should not have mattered. It did. Take it, I said. He bit into it, chewed once, twice. His eyes lifted to mine with the same measured attention he gave rooms before entering them. Too much salt in the cream, he said. I stared at him. There is no salt in the cream. Half a pinch. Maybe from your fingers? I turned, grabbed the spoon, tasted, and froze. Half a pinch. Barely there. Enough to sharpen the sweetness. I looked back at him. How did you? He set the bun down. Because you're angry. Because you're angry, he said. I set the spoon down slowly. At the pastry, at me. Heat climbed my neck. I hated being read by a man who barely spoke. You think highly of yourself. No. He looked at the half-filled tray. I think you hide in details. That landed too close to bone. I folded the edge of the dish towel over and over between my fingers. You lock people in rooms. I kept you alive. You kept me. The words sat between us. Hard, undeniable. He did not correct me. Outside the kitchen, somewhere down the hall, a door closed with the padded weight of old money. The estate settled around us. A distant hum from the refrigerator motors, the faint sea wind whistling under one window frame, and under all of it, the soft click of black beads against his thumb. Click! Do you always stand there and make women nervous in your kitchen? I asked. Yes. I looked up so fast I almost laughed. His mouth shifted by a fraction. It did terrible things to the room. I should hate you, I muttered. You probably do. That doesn't seem to bother you. No. It should have. That calm. That absence of performance. He never tried to charm me out of my fear or explain himself into softness. He simply stood in the middle of his own darkness and expected the world to adjust around him. Maybe that was why I kept noticing the small things instead. The sweater pushed back just enough to expose his wrists, the faint pale line of an old scar disappearing under the cuff, the way he positioned himself at the doorway angle without seeming to always where he could see the window, the hall, me. I turned back to the cream before he could see I had noticed. Who else lives here? I asked. My men. Staff. Sophia in the West Wing. Tommaso, wherever food is left unattended. That feels less like an answer and more like a warning. It's both. I piped the last bun and lined them on the tray. And Bianca? Silence. I didn't mean to look at him then. I really didn't, but I did. He was already watching me. The temperature of the room changed by 1 degree. She stays elsewhere, he said. Not my business, I told myself. Not my business, I repeated while my stomach did something thin and unpleasant. Before I could stop myself, I said, she looked comfortable giving orders in your house. She's been around long enough to forget which rooms belong to her. I set the pastry bag down a little too hard. You say that like it's a problem. It is when people begin making decisions without permission. The words were quiet. Too quiet. A warning dropped into water. I wiped my hands on the apron and tried to sound casual. You mean the men who took me? Yes. You know who they work for. I know who profits from confusion. Not the same answer, deliberately. He reached for the bun again, broke it in half this time, and looked down at the cream. You made this the way people pray. My laugh escaped before I could catch it. That may be the most ridiculous thing you've said. And yet, he held out half of it to me. The simple act of taking food from his hand felt stranger than it should have. My fingers touched his knuckles for a breath. Heat moved up my arm so abruptly I almost dropped the pastry. Almost. His gaze lowered to my mouth as I bit into it. That was all. Just one glance. The air went thick. I swallowed too carefully, and then footsteps pounded down the hall hard enough to break whatever had just started breathing between us. Tommaso appeared in the doorway wearing silk pajama pants, a dress shirt half-buttoned wrong, and the expression of a man personally offended by dawn, despite it still being the middle of the night. "I knew it," he announced. "I smelled sugar and emotional repression from the stairs." Dante did not turn. "Go away. I can't." Maria caught me stealing mortadella and said if I wanted midnight food, I had to ask politely like a civilized person. Then I saw the kitchen light and thought, perhaps my suffering has ended. Tommaso saw the tray. He placed a hand over his heart. "Madonna bless the captured baker." "I'm not captured," I said automatically. Tommaso looked from me to Dante and back again. "Ah, so we're doing fiction tonight." A shocked laugh broke out of me before I could help it. Dante closed his eyes once, as if summoning patience from somewhere expensive. Tommaso leaned over the tray, inhaled dramatically, and then frowned at Dante. "Did you already criticize them?" "No." "You did it with your face then?" "Same effect." He took one bite and actually moaned. "Maria will hate her. This is wonderful. I love conflict in the kitchen when it benefits me." Something in Dante's posture eased by a hair as he watched me laugh again. I saw it. So did Tommaso, apparently, because his brows lifted in brief, dangerous interest before he wisely looked away. Then a phone rang. Not mine. Dante's. He answered without taking his eyes from me. "Speak." The shift in him was immediate. It always was. Warmth, if I could call it that, sealed over. What remained was colder, sharper. "Where?" he asked. Tommaso straightened. Dante listened, gaze going distant in the way of men already calculating blood. "Keep him breathing. I'm coming." He ended the call and set the untouched half of pastry on the counter. "What happened?" I asked. "One of my port supervisors tried to leave the city." "You mean run?" "Yes, and someone shot him before my men got to him." Tommaso muttered something in Italian that sounded like a curse and a prayer at the same time. Dante looked at him. "Lock the West Hall. No one in or out." Tommaso nodded. The foolishness dropped clean off him when orders arrived. I stored that away too. He was softer than the others, but not harmless. Dante turned to me. "You stay here until Sofia comes." "I'm not a ceramic figurine." "No," he said. "You're a target." The words hit different in a kitchen at 2 a.m. with cream on my fingers. He started for the door. "Dante." It was the first time I had said his name without Mr. Portek. Salvatore wrapped around it like armor. He stopped. I didn't know what I meant to ask until it came out. "Did they take me because of you?" I said. "Or because of her?" Tommaso went very still. Dante looked back over his shoulder. His face gave me nothing. Then, carefully, "Because someone wanted me to arrive too late." He left. Tommaso exhaled through his teeth. "Well, I suddenly don't want a second pastry, and I would like that noted in writing." My hands had gone cold. "Tommaso." "Maso, please." Only priests and tax auditors use Tommaso. I leaned both palms on the counter. What did he mean? Tommaso studied me for a beat too long. Then he plucked the second half of the bun from Dante's abandoned piece and sighed like a man choosing his own method of death. "It means," he said gently, "that whatever is happening here started before the van." The kitchen seemed to narrow around me. I looked down at the cream I had piped too neatly and understood, with a rising dread I could not yet name, that someone inside this house had already put hands on my life. The next morning, Sofia Belandi taught me how to hold a gun, not because I asked, because she walked into my room at 7 carrying coffee, a wool coat, and a pistol small enough to fit in her palm like jewelry. Sofia was 30, elegant in the severe way cathedrals were elegant, with dark hair in a blunt knot and a face that looked carved rather than painted. She was Dante's head of internal security, which meant every servant lowered their eyes around her and every soldier pretended not to be afraid. "Come on," she said. "That's not an explanation." "No, it's an instruction." She led me through the west hall, down a narrow servant's staircase, and out into the back courtyard where the air smelled like wet stone and rosemary. The estate rose around us in pale limestone and iron balconies. Beyond the wall, the sea flashed silver between cypress trees. Sophia put the pistol in my hand and adjusted my grip without ceremony. I've never held one. I know. Does Dante? Yes. Then why am I here? Because you freeze at the wrong moment, she said. And because he knows it. The words stung because they were true only in the most complicated way. I did not freeze when someone was hurt. I froze after. In the spaces where fear had time to find me, Sophia positioned my shoulders. You see the center. You breathe out. You do not close your eyes because loud men taught you noise was the danger. Noise is just noise. I looked at the target board propped against a lemon tree. My hands felt clumsy, heavy. Have you always worked for him? Her expression did not change. Long enough. That isn't an answer either. It's the only one you get today. I fired and missed the board entirely. Sophia nodded like she had expected nothing else. Again. By the fourth shot, I clipped the edge of the paper. By the sixth, I hit low center. Something ugly and fierce steadied in me with each recoil. When we were done, Sophia took the gun back and handed me coffee. Good. You learn quickly. I learn because I'm terrified. The smart ones do. As we crossed the courtyard back toward the house, raised voices drifted from the east arcade. Male. Angry, one of them Dante's. Sophia stopped so abruptly my coffee sloshed over my knuckles. Inside, she said, but I'd already seen them. Dante stood at the top of the chapel steps in a charcoal suit, the black beads wrapped around his fist. Across from him was Bianca in cream woolen sunglasses too large for the cloudy morning, her face pale beneath them. Luca Ferrante, Dante's port supervisor and right hand on shipping, waited one step lower with the rigid expression of a man trying not to witness private ruin. Bianca said something I couldn't hear. Dante's answer came clear as broken glass. You touched what was mine to judge. The world seemed to tilt. He had used the first of the two words. Men like him always used too easily, but he hadn't said it to me. He said it about a line crossed, a decision taken, a violation of authority. It sounded worse. Bianca laughed once. It cracked in the middle. And what was she, Dante? Flower on your floor? That was when he saw me. No visible reaction, none. But the air around him pulled tight. Sophia moved half a step in front of me. Protective, warning, both. Bianca followed his line of sight and turned. For a moment, woman looked at woman across wet stone in unfinished knowledge. Then Bianca removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed. You should have died in the van, she said softly. It would have been kinder. Luca swore. Sophia took one step forward, and Dante moved faster than anyone. He was between Bianca and me in the space of a breath, one hand catching Bianca's wrist before she could do anything stupid, the other braced slightly out from his side, not touching me, not shielding me fully, but close enough that the heat of him reached my coat sleeve. Enough, he said. Bianca stared up at him, shaking. For the first time, I saw something under the diamonds and silk, not glamour. Damage. She sent her location, Bianca whispered, and you would have gone. Dante's jaw tightened once. The listener would have known already. I didn't. Not yet. I only felt the shape of truth moving under the stones. He released Bianca's wrist with visible restraint. Take her car keys, he told Luca. She doesn't leave the city. Bianca laughed again, and this time it sounded almost like grief. You still think, I'm the worst thing near you. Dante said nothing. That silence told me everything and nothing. Bianca looked at me one last time, not with hatred, with something far more exhausting. Then she turned and went down the steps without waiting for permission, Luca following at a careful distance. Sophia exhaled. Inside. But Dante did not move away. Neither did I. We stood too close on the chapel landing, rain-slick stone underfoot, the air full of rosemary and coming storm. The black rosary beads hung loose from his hand now. One brushed the back of my wrist. Click. I should have stepped back. He should have. Instead, he said very quietly, "Did she touch you?" I looked up. What? In the van. After. Realization flared hot and immediate. No. Something in his face uncoiled. Not relief exactly. More dangerous than relief. The easing of a violence he had been carrying by the throat. She deleted it, I said. There it was. The fast mystery opened. His gaze held mine. Yes, I did not feel heartbreak. I felt fury. Clean, bright. You knew. As of this morning. You still didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. Because I walked in on it. His mouth hardened. Because if I had told you before confirming it, you would have doubted yourself instead of her. That stopped me. Because he was right, and I hated him for being right. Rain started again, in a thin, drifting mist. One drop landed on my cheek. Another. Dante lifted his hand. I thought idiotically that he might touch my face. Instead, he stopped an inch short, knuckles curling back, and tucked my coat lapel closed where it had slipped open. That restraint hurt worse than contact would have. Inside mercy. The nickname had changed by half a degree. Still possession. Less verdict. I looked at his hand at my collar, the scar across one knuckle, the rosary wound around his wrist like a promise he kept making to himself. Then a shot cracked from the courtyard wall. Everything shattered. Dante slammed into me before sound finished reaching my brain. His body hit mine hard enough to drive the air from my lungs as he turned, taking us both down onto the chapel steps. Stone tore my palm. Sophia shouted. Luca yelled from somewhere below. Another shot screamed overhead and punched into limestone. Dante covered me completely. Not romantic. Not graceful. Heavy. Absolute. His hand locked behind my skull to keep it from the steps. His shoulder jerked once under my cheek. I smelled gunpowder. Rain. Wool. Cold metal. And blood. Dante. Quiet. The word came rougher than usual. Sophia returned fire. 3 shots, measured. Someone screamed below the wall. Men were running now, the whole estate waking violent around us. I realized with a sick jolt that Dante's hand on the back of my head was wet. Are you hit? No answer. I twisted under him. He caught my wrist instantly, pinning it between us, and for one charged second our faces were close enough that I saw the tiny fracture in his control. Stay down, he said. His voice wasn't calm anymore. That frightened me more than the bullets. When Luca shouted all clear from below, Dante pushed up first. Blood darkened the side of his suit jacket just under the ribs. Nothing deep, he said before I could speak. I hadn't realized I was reaching for him until his gaze dropped to my hand suspended in the rain between us. He looked at it, then at me, and did not take it. That was restraint number 1, and it burned. By afternoon, the house smelled like disinfectant and anger. Men moved faster. Doors closed harder. Somewhere on the lower floor, a radio kept spitting dock schedules and road names and code words I couldn't follow. Dante had been stitched by the estate doctor and disappeared into the east wing with Sophia and Luca. I had been told to stay in my room again, which I obeyed for exactly 23 minutes. Then I followed the smell of burnt sugar. The old conservatory on the south side of the estate had been converted into a dessert room years ago, Sophia told me later. Marble counters, copper lamps, shelves of preserves, a blast chiller humming in one corner. Its glass roof threw pale afternoon light across everything. I found it empty. Good. I needed empty. My hands were steadier when they had work, and there was too much inside me with nowhere to go. Bianca's face, Dante's blood, the remembered weight of him covering me on stone. So I made caramel, then pâte à choux, then a bitter chocolate cream dark enough to look almost black under the lamp. I didn't decide on the dessert so much as discover it as I went. Bitter base, rose cream center, burnt sugar shell so thin it would shatter under the gentlest spoon. When Sophia found me an hour later, I was torching the top. She leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. This is either therapy or treason, maybe both. Her mouth almost moved. What is it? I looked at the row of finished desserts. Dark, delicate, defensive. I don't know yet. That was a lie. I knew exactly what it was, just not why that bothered me. Sophia pushed off the doorframe and came closer. You should be resting. So should your boss. He doesn't. Then neither do I. She watched me a moment, then nodded toward the tray. One of the footmen swears you bit a kidnapper. I did. Good. I almost smiled. That sounded like praise. It was. The sound of men's voices approached through the corridor. Sophia straightened. Don't speak unless you need to. Why does everyone keep telling me that? Because your instincts are expensive. Dante entered with Luca beside him. Luca Ferrante looked like the sort of man trust came easily to, if you didn't know better, broad-shouldered, dark blonde, old scar at the chin. Eyes that missed nothing. He handled shipping for Dante, but more than that, he carried the quiet competence of someone who had spent years making chaos arrive on time. His gaze went first to me, checking, then to the dessert tray, then back to me with a flicker of something like respect. Dante stopped when he saw the room. The conservatory had changed around me without my noticing. Steam on the glass, sugar in the air, orange peels drying on a rack beside the copper pans. For the first time since I had arrived, the estate held a space that felt touched by my hands. You disobeyed, he said. I set the torch down. I made dessert. Those are not opposites. Luca glanced between us like a man taking cover before weather. Sophia went very still at the door. I looked at Dante's side. Fresh bandage under his shirt, hidden but not from me. You were shot, I said, and you're here arguing about room assignments. His beads clicked once against his palm. Who taught you this? He asked, looking at the desserts. My mother. That's not what I meant. I knew. I still answered the safe question. She believed sugar told the truth. And you? I looked down at the tray. I think sugar only makes people honest enough to hear it. Luca muttered. Christ. Dante's gaze stayed on me. What does this one say? There was no clean way to answer. Not without exposing more than I wanted to. But maybe the day had already broken something in me. Strong on top, I said, nodding toward the caramel shell, fragilely in the wrong place. Silence. I should have left it there. Instead, I ruined myself by adding, the rose is hidden under the bitter layer. Most people won't taste it until too late. No one spoke. Sophia looked away first. Luca, very wisely, cleared his throat and picked up one of the desserts. If this is poison, I'd like to die beautifully. Eat and find out, I said. He cracked the shell with his spoon. The sound was absurdly sharp in the quiet. Then he tasted it and shut his eyes for one long second. Oh, that's insulting. I blinked. What? It's excellent. I'm offended. To my left, Sophia almost smiled again. Dante did not move, but something in his face changed so subtly I might have imagined it. Not softness. Recognition, maybe. Of something I had not meant to show him. Luca pointed his spoon at me. You know, if you ever get bored of civilian life, we can weaponize this. Luca, Dante said. What? I'm building morale. That was when the estate line rang from the wall phone. Sophia answered first. Listened. Her expression altered by a degree. Send him in, she said. A minute later, my father walked into the conservatory. I had spent 2 days wanting to see him and dreading it. Seeing him in his bakery coat with flour on one sleeve nearly undid me. He looked older than he had on Sunday. Smaller. Fear had a way of shrinking men after it failed to make them brave. Elena. Papa. He crossed the room quickly and took my face in both hands. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? These people said you were safe, but what does safe mean in a house with armed men and statues worth more than my lungs? I laughed and cried at the same time. Humiliating. I'm okay. That was a lie too, but parents took the smaller mercy when they could. He kissed my forehead, then finally seemed to register the rest of the room. Dante, Luca, Sofia, the trays of dessert. His shoulders tightened. I should not have taken the order, he said. I knew the name. I knew better. Papa, no. He looked at Dante then, and if he was afraid, he hid it inside fury. This happened because your world leaks. Dante inclined his head once. Yes. That answer startled my father into silence. Then he pulled an envelope from his pocket and held it out to me. This came to the bakery after dawn. No stamp, just your name. Sophia took it from him before I could. She opened it with a knife from the counter and slid out a single photograph. My lungs stopped. It was me in the back of the van, wrists bound, face turned toward the floor. Timestamp in one corner. On the back, written in black marker. You're sweeter when he bleeds for you. My fingers went numb. My mistake, I whispered before I meant to. Dante's gaze cut to me. What mistake? I should have lied. Instead I said, because shock stripped me honest. At the warehouse, one of the men asked if you'd pay. I told him you were too late. The silence after that was horrible, because I understood it the second I heard myself say it. If someone inside had arranged my abduction to test Dante's response, then telling the kidnappers he hadn't come had changed the price of keeping me alive. My mistake had cost him time. Maybe blood, Sophia swore under her breath. Luca went rigid. My father looked from face to face and understood only that he understood nothing. Dante did not raise his voice. He only said, "Everyone out." My father bristled. "I'm not leaving my daughter alone. You are if you want her breathing tomorrow." The room cleared in hard, fast silence. When the door shut behind the others, I realized my hands were shaking so badly I could hear the spoon on porcelain rattling against the tray. Dante stood across the marble from me and said the worst thing gently. "You think this is your fault?" Tears burned so suddenly my vision blurred. I changed something. Yes, that honesty broke me cleanly. I turned away because I could not bear his face while I was crying. I hated crying in front of men. Hated how it made every room feel tilted. Then, after one breath, then two, a folded linen handkerchief appeared in my field of vision. Again. White. Monogrammed. Ridiculous. I took it with furious gratitude. "Why are you kind at the worst possible moments?" I asked. "I'm not kind." I laughed through tears. "Then what are you?" He was silent long enough that I looked up. A mistake. He was closer now. Not touching. Never the touch. Only nearness and the knowledge of how easily it could become more. "A man deciding," he said. About what, he did not add. He left before I could ask, and I stood in the sugar room with his handkerchief pressed to my mouth, understanding for the first time that the danger was no longer only outside me. It had begun to answer from within. That night, war arrived wearing headlights. I knew because no one bothered lying to me anymore. The estate shifted after sunset. Gates checked twice. Floodlights lit the south wall. Luca took 3 calls in the hall outside the dining room and ended all of them with the same clipped phrase, "Move the convoy." Sophia armed men I had previously believed decorative. Even Tommaso stopped complaining long enough to carry ammunition crates to the garage and mutter that if he died before Maria loved him back, he intended to haunt everyone selectively. By 10, the wind off the sea had turned cold enough to bite through stone. I stood in the upstairs gallery watching men cross the courtyard below like dark pieces on a board. Dante was near the gate speaking with Luca, one hand in his coat pocket, the other wrapped around the black rosary. Even from that distance, I knew the moment he felt me looking. He glanced up, no wave, no signal, just that brief, impossible awareness. Then the estate lights went out. Everything dropped into black. A woman somewhere below screamed. Men shouted. The generator failed to catch. For one suspended second, the whole house seemed to stop breathing. Then gunfire tore through the dark. Sophia hit the gallery from nowhere and grabbed my arm. "Move." "Where's my father?" "Safe room." That should have comforted me. It didn't. We ran toward the west stairs while below us the courtyard became noise booths shouting, the splinter of wood, the hard, relentless punctuation of automatic fire. Emergency red lights flickered on too slowly, bathing the hall in a low, blood-colored glow. A man stepped out of the side corridor with a gun already raised. I did not think. I slammed the silver coffee tray I was carrying into his wrist. The shot went wild into the ceiling. Sophia fired once from beside me and he dropped. The tray rang against the marble and spun. Sophia looked at me with quick, savage approval. Good. We made the stairwell. Almost. An explosion blew the side door inward, showering the landing with glass. I hit the floor hard. My ears rang. Sophia disappeared in smoke and splintered light. Hands grabbed my coat from behind and yanked. I kicked. Connected with a shin. Someone cursed. The man dragged me backward toward the service corridor. Mask. Gloves. Breath hot through fabric. I clawed for the wall, for anything, and my fingers caught a dropped kitchen knife from some abandoned tray. I slashed blindly. He shouted and lost hold of me just as a deeper voice cut through the hall like a blade. Move away from her. Everything in me recognized Dante before my brain did. The masked man turned. Bad choice. Dante shot him twice, center mass, and kept walking before the body hit the floor. His face in the emergency light did not look human in any comforting sense. Controlled, yes, but feral under the control, like something ancient and leashed too tightly. He reached me, crouched, checked my wrists, my throat, the side of my head where I'd struck the floor. Efficient. Fast. No wasted tenderness. You cut? He asked. Not mine. His hand paused at my jaw for half a beat too long. That was restraint number 2. Then he hauled me up and pushed me behind him as another burst of gunfire shredded the corridor corner. Stay on my left. I did. Because fear made obedience holy. We moved through the service passage toward the seawall exit while the house buckled around us. Smoke drifted low. The electrical fire smell mixed with old plaster and cordite until the air tasted burnt. Twice, Dante stopped me with a hand at my sternum before I walked into danger. I couldn't yet see. Once he shot through a closed pantry door without breaking stride, and the body on the other side collapsed a second later. I had never seen skill that terrible. At the seawall, wind slammed into us hard enough to stagger me. Below, waves hurled themselves against black rock. Above, storm clouds smothered the moon. Lucas shouted from the lower drive that the rear gate had been breached. Then pain exploded across my upper arm. I didn't even hear the shot. I only knew I was spinning sideways. Then Dante's hands were on me, dragging me behind a stone buttress while the world narrowed to salt, blood, and ringing silence. I looked down. My sleeve was wet. Not deep, maybe, but enough to open panic like a knife in my chest. No, I heard myself say. No, no. Dante cupped the back of my neck hard enough to anchor me. Elena. I couldn't breathe. Delay became terror in an instant. My mother in the car. My father circling the hospital. Red lights on dashboard glass. Stop. 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 Elena. His forehead nearly touched mine. Look at me. I did. Rain striped his face. There was blood at his collar that wasn't his. His eyes were dark and fully on me in a way that made the storm recede. You're with me, he said. I shook my head because the past had already climbed into my throat. My mother died because my father waited, I whispered. He waited, and Dante went very still. Then his hand slid from my neck to my uninjured shoulder, steady and impossibly careful. I know, he said. Not, I'm sorry. Not, it's fine. Only that, and because he didn't try to soothe it smaller than it was, the panic eased enough for air. He tore his own handkerchief into strips with his teeth, and one hand tied pressure above the graze and checked the wound. Flesh burn, not through. Painful, survivable. He looked up then, past me, toward the dark hillside. His expression changed. Someone was there. I turned and saw only a figure at the ridge for the space of lightning, a tall man in a long coat, watching the wall instead of firing. He lifted 2 fingers in something almost like greeting. Dante went colder than the rain. The man vanished into the dark. Who was that? No answer. Only the beads and Dante's fist biting into his palm. He looked back at me, and for one moment the world narrowed to the raw fact of him kneeling in the storm, hands bloodied, breath harsh, every violent instinct bent toward keeping me alive. Something in his face gave way. He brushed his thumb once beneath my eye. Rain, not tears. Maybe. I couldn't tell. You should go, I whispered. His gaze held mine. I know, he said. I meant from me. He meant toward the fight. We both knew it. I swallowed. The words cost more than blood. I don't know what this is. I only know, don't leave me like that. Not without saying something. Not I want you. Never that. Not something whole and fearless. Only this ragged, humiliating fragment. His breath changed. For 1 second I thought he might kiss me. He looked at my mouth. I know he did. The storm itself seemed to brace. Then he stopped. Restraint number 3. He pressed his forehead briefly to mine instead. A contact so small it felt devastating. In the dark above them, Dante Salvatore understood the truth with the same disgust and awe he reserved for disasters he could not prevent. It was not her face that undid him, not the softness of her voice or the impossible timing of her arrival. It was that first kneeling moment in his study, the way she had used fear to beg for another man's life. Mercy offered where everyone else calculated leverage. She did it again now, bleeding, shaking, asking not for promises, not for safety, but for something human, before he returned to violence. He had been called ruthless for so long he had mistaken it for structure. Elena Russo kept finding the fracture lines. Mercy, he thought, and knew he was already lost. Then Luca shouted from the drive that they were losing the east flank. Dante rose. He slid one of the black rosary beads off the worn cord and closed my fingers around it. Hold this? What? So I know what I'm coming back for. The line hit low and lethal. Then he was gone into gunfire, and I stood pressed to the seawall with his bead warm in my fist and war roaring in from all sides. By dawn, 3 men were dead. 1 generator was ash, and the estate chapel had no windows left. I sat in the infirmary with my bandaged arm and Dante's rosary bead hidden in my coat pocket while the doctor cleaned soot from my cheek. The room smelled of iodine, gauze, and burned wiring drifting in from the hall. Outside, workers already swept glass. That was the thing about violent houses. They cleaned quickly. My father wanted to leave before the sun was fully up. I understood why. So did Dante. No, my father said for the 4th time. Standing in the infirmary doorway with his jaw set, I'm taking her home. Home may be poor and drafty and smell like yeast in the curtains, but no one shoots through the walls there. Luca, stationed by the corridor, looked at the ruined chapel windows and wisely said nothing. Dante stood near the sink with dried blood at one cuff, and his face arranged into that terrible calm I had learned to fear. Your apartment is no longer your home in any meaningful sense. You don't get to decide that. I already did. My father stepped forward. You think money makes you God. No, Dante said. Experience does. I had never wanted to slap and protect a man at the same time until Dante Salvatore. Papa. My voice came out rough. Please. He turned to me and all the fury in him broke around fear. Elena, they nearly killed you. I know. I should never have taken that order. This again, the old guilt. The old delay. I saw it so clearly then. The way men like my father and Dante carried responsibility in opposite directions. One folded under it. One became sharp enough to cut. I slid off the infirmary bed despite the doctor's protest. I need air. No one stopped me. That was their mistake. I crossed the back courtyard, past the shattered chapel, and kept walking until I reached the service gate near the olive grove. It stood half open for deliveries while men repaired the hinges. Beyond it, the road curved toward the lower village, sunlit and ordinary, with laundry moving between balconies and a scooter whining somewhere downhill. Freedom looked insultingly normal. I stood there with my coat over my arm and thought, I can leave. No guards touched me. No one blocked the road. This, then, was the real choice. Not captivity. Not being saved. A gate. A road. My feet. If I left, I could go back to flour sacks and dawn shifts and the bakery till sticking on damp mornings. I could spend the rest of my life pretending what I had seen was a fever dream. I could stop waiting for guns in hallways. Stop noticing where Dante's hands were. Stop listening for the click of beads. If I stayed in a world where men died against seawalls and women in diamonds deleted cries for help. And yet, there was also Sophia quietly teaching me to shoot because helplessness offended her. Luca bringing my father coffee at dawn without comment. Tommaso sneaking cannoli into the infirmary and crossing himself over the doctor's calorie count. There was Dante bleeding into his own shirt while telling me to look at him. The road lay open. Behind me, footsteps approached carefully over gravel. Sophia, of course. You're not very good at escaping, she said. I kept my eyes on the road. I haven't decided if I'm doing that. That should probably come before reaching the gate. I almost smiled, which annoyed me. Would you leave? I asked. Sophia was quiet long enough that I turned. She stood a few feet away in black trousers and a fitted blazer, one hand tucked in her pocket against the wind. Her face gave me the truth because she didn't know how to manufacture comfort. If I were you, she said, I would have left after the van. That's encouraging. You asked. I looked back at the road, and yet you're here. Yes, that's not an answer either. Her gaze moved to the half-open gate. I was 15 when my brother sold my address to men who wanted leverage on someone else. Dante found me first. I stared. He was not kind then either, she said, but he was precise. It saved my life. Why tell me that now? Because if you stay knowing the price. This house consumes soft things. The wind moved my hair across my mouth. I tucked it back with my good hand. And if I leave? Then he'll put guards on your father, rotate your routes, move your bakery deliveries, and probably buy half the block without telling you. Then he'll pretend it isn't for you. A laugh escaped me. Helpless. Hurt. Sophia's expression eased by 1 millimeter. He is worse than most men. He is better than the ones coming. That was not romance. It was a warning shaped like truth. Before I could answer, shouting erupted from the lower yard. We both turned. Tommaso stumbled around the corner at a run, one hand pressed to his side. For one surreal second, I thought he was laughing. Then I saw the blood soaking his pale suit shirt. Everything in me dropped. Maso, he grinned wildly as if apologizing for being dramatic. Good news, he gasped. The geese did not get me. Sophia was already moving. I ran too, bandaged arm screaming. Tommaso made it 3 more steps before his knees buckled. I caught him under one shoulder as he sagged, and the weight of him nearly took me down. Hey, I said, because panic made idiots of us all. Don't you dare die before Maria notices you. He coughed a laugh that turned into pain. Cruel woman. Use my final moments to mock my love story. Blood soaks through my sleeve. Not mortal maybe, but too much. Sophia shouted for the medic team. Luca came from the garage at a dead sprint. Dante from somewhere beyond that, faster than all of them. When he reached us, he took one look at Tommaso, one look at the blood all over me, and something lethal crossed his face. It's his, I said quickly. Not mine. He dropped to one knee and pressed both hands over the wound at Tommaso's side. Efficient. Brutal pressure. Tommaso whimpered and actually tried to apologize. Do not, Dante said. Tommaso blinked up at him, gray around the mouth. If I die, tell Maria I hated her pesto. I want her haunted. Luca made a broken sound that might have been a laugh. Sophia rolled gauze into Dante's waiting hand. We worked around each other without speaking. My fingers pressed where he told me. My body moved before my fear could stop it. The gate behind us remained open to the road. I saw it over Dante's shoulder. So did he. For one suspended second, his eyes lifted to mine and asked nothing. That was worse, because he would have let me choose. The medic team arrived with a stretcher. We got Tommaso inside alive, cursing weakly at all of us for jostling him. Maria appeared from the kitchens, white-faced and furious, slapped his uninjured arm for frightening her, then burst into tears when she thought no one could see. Later, after the doctors said he would live, I went back to the service gate alone. The road was still there. My old life was still out there too, in theory, but standing with Tommaso's blood dried on my skin, I understood something unbearable. Leaving now would not return me to innocence. It would only move my body away while the rest of me stayed here, altered. I took the rosary bead from my coat pocket and held it tight enough to mark my palm. Then I turned away from the road and walked back into the house, open-eyed. No one forced me. That was the cost. I made my mistake the next night, not because I was foolish, because I was tired, and tiredness is when hope dresses itself as reason. Bianca asked to see me. The request came through a maid with lowered eyes and a message so formal it almost felt safe. Signora Ventresca would like 10 minutes in the south greenhouse if you are willing. If you are willing. As if willingness had anything to do with women in Dante's orbit. I should have refused. Sophia would have. Luca definitely would have. But Tommaso was alive and complaining again. The house had survived one dawn without gunfire, and some dangerous part of me wanted to understand the woman who had looked at my near death like a mercy she regretted. So I went. The south greenhouse glowed amber in the evening, all glass panes and damp earth and lemon trees in terracotta tubs. Bianca stood beside the fountain in a pale blue dress with no diamonds on. Without the armor of her usual perfection, she looked younger, more breakable. That did not make her safe. "You came," she said. "I'm beginning to think that's my worst quality." A real smile almost touched her mouth. "No. Your worst quality is that you believe explanation changes damage." I folded my arms over my bandaged one. "You deleted my message." "Yes." The honesty stunned me. "Why?" Her gaze moved to the fountain water. "Because for 3 years I was useful. Decorative when needed. Quiet when not. I learned the shape of his schedules, his preferred wine, which of his men lied to his face, and which only lied to themselves. Then you bled on his floor for a stranger, and suddenly the house tilted. I didn't know what to say to that. Nothing kind, certainly. So you had me taken." "No." I stared. Bianca looked up. "I had your message deleted. The van was already in motion. Matteo's people arranged the rest." The name hit like a loose wire. Matteo. The man on the ridge, the one Dante looked at like a wound with a pulse. "Why tell me now?" "Because I am tired." She smiled without humor. "And because by the time this conversation matters, one of us will be dead or irrelevant." Behind us, the greenhouse door clicked. I turned. Luca Ferrante stood there with 2 armed men I did not recognize. For a heartbeat, relief flooded me. Then I saw Bianca's face. Not surprise. Recognition. Luca drew his gun and pointed it at Sophia's empty place beside me, then at my chest when he found only me. "Sorry," he said, and he sounded almost sincere. "Schedule changed." My body went cold all at once. Bianca whispered. "No." Luca's jaw tightened. "You should have left when he let you." Everything after that happened too fast to hold cleanly. One of the men grabbed Bianca, another grabbed me. I elbowed backward, hit ribs, almost broke free, and Luca caught my injured arm hard enough to make white explode behind my eyes. "Don't damage her," he snapped to the others. "He needs to see what he loses." Bianca went wild then, clawing at the man holding her. "This wasn't the deal." Luca laughed once. "That's because you were never in the deal." We were taken through the service tunnel under the conservatory, down stone steps slick with old damp, and into the glass cellar beneath the east wing where rare wines were stored behind iron mesh and temperature-controlled panels. It was cold enough to bite the lungs. The low lights made everyone look dead already. Luca tied Bianca to one support pillar and me to another across from her. The irony would have been funny in a kinder life. Bianca's lipstick was gone now. Her mouth trembled. "You fool," she said to Luca. "He'll kill you." Luca crouched in front of me instead, probably. Up close, he smelled like cedar smoke and rain, like every dependable man who had ever been dangerous for the wrong reasons. "Why?" I asked. He looked tired, truly tired, because I spent 10 years building his ports, cleaning his wars, making myself useful enough to survive his temper and his mercy. Then Matteo offered what Dante never would. What? A future not arranged around one man's grief. There it was, not greed exactly, resentment sharpened into treason. Bianca laughed shakily from across the room. "So you sold yourself to the brother who butchers children for leverage?" Luca flinched. Tiny, but real. "Matteo doesn't butcher children," he said. Bianca stared at him with open horror. "You don't even know which lies you're living in." He rose too fast. Anger made him clumsy for the first time. When he left, the 2 guards remained by the door. Bianca and I listened to the machinery hum cold air through the cellar. After a long time, she said, "I did not know it was Luca." I believed her. "Why did you stay with Dante?" I asked. "Because he never lied to me about what he was." She laughed bitterly. "That is the ridiculous thing about men like him. Their honesty is the trap." I thought of the white handkerchiefs, the beads, the way he said yes to accusations most men would decorate into excuses. Bianca looked at me across the chilled aisle. "He won't forgive me." "No." "Will you?" I almost said no just to keep the world simple. Instead, "I don't know." That seemed to wound her more. Hours passed that way. Maybe less. Cold changed time. At some point, one of the guards came to check the knots. I watched his belt, not his face. Keys on the right side, phone in back pocket, lazy left knee. When he leaned over Bianca, she started sobbing. Badly acted. Too late. The guard smirked and stepped closer. I kicked the metal rack beside me as hard as I could. Bottles crashed in a violent cascade. The second guard spun toward the noise. Bianca drove both feet into the first man's kneecap with a crack that dropped him screaming. I lunged sideways, caught the fallen rack hook with my bound hands, and sawed the rope against jagged metal until my skin came off with it. Pain makes strange, clean rooms in the mind. I got one wrist free. Bianca shouted a warning. I ducked as the second guard fired. Glass exploded over us. I grabbed the broken neck of a wine bottle and drove it into his shoulder before he could aim again. He hit me hard enough to drop me to the floor. But he dropped the keys. I crawled. Reached. Missed. Bianca stamped the first guard's hand when he went for his gun and screamed at me, "Elena!" I got the keys. By the time I freed her, my hands were cut to ribbons and my arm was throbbing with each heartbeat. Bianca looked at me as if I were something she had no language for. "Why did you come back for me?" she asked. I shoved the last keyring into her palm. "Because I'm an idiot." We made it to the cellar stairs before the upper door slammed open. Luca stood there with a gun and a face emptied of hesitation. He looked at Bianca first, then at me, and said almost regretfully, "This is why he chose wrong." Luca shot Bianca in the leg before I understood he had decided. She went down on the cellar stairs with a cry that echoed off stone and glass. I threw myself at her by instinct, which was exactly the opening he wanted. His men surged from behind him. One grabbed my hair. Another slammed my face into the railing hard enough to fill my mouth with blood. I heard Bianca curse him with a creativity. Pain had apparently only improved. Then the world narrowed to rope, concrete, diesel, and the inside of a harbor warehouse 3 districts away. My wrists were tied behind a support post. My lip was split. My head rang every time I blinked. Bianca had been dragged somewhere else. I knew because I could no longer hear her and because Luca was too careful to keep liabilities in the same room. The warehouse smelled like engine oil, salt, and old fish baked into the boards. Outside, gulls screamed over the docks. Inside, generators throbbed low enough to feel through the floor. Luca paced in front of me with a phone in one hand. "He's coming," he said. I spat blood onto the concrete. "That was always your plan." Yes, you helped him for 10 years. I helped a man who mistook suffering for discipline. His gaze cut to me. Then you arrived, and suddenly he remembered he had blood left in him. Men like Dante get cities killed when they start hoping. I should have been afraid. I was, but anger had finally burned clean through it. Then why not just kill me? A tired smile touched his mouth. Because Matteo likes witnesses, and because Dante should feel the moment he loses control. Matteo is his brother. That got a reaction. Small, involuntary. So, I had guessed right. Luca crouched in front of me. Did he tell you about the priest? No. He saw that and almost laughed. Of course he didn't. Saints embarrass men like him. Before I could force more out of him, the warehouse side door opened. The man who entered had Dante's height and none of his stillness. Matteo Caruso moved like flame elegant, consuming, delighted by his own burn. Dark coat, dark hair, a little too long. Smile that arrived before kindness and survived long after it left the room. When he saw me tied to the post, he tilted his head as if examining expensive damage. So this is Mercy. The nickname in his mouth made my skin crawl. Don't call me that. His smile widened. Interesting. He gave you that before or after he started bleeding for you? I said nothing. Matteo came closer anyway. Around his throat hung a thin silver chain with a cross on it so polished it looked like mockery. He still carries the black beads, Matteo asked lightly. I wonder if he's ever told you why. When I didn't answer, he crouched so our eyes were level. There was a priest once, he said. Father Paolo. He took in boys no one wanted and mistook hunger for morality. Dante was always his favorite, quiet, useful, eager to be good. I was the other one. I didn't want the story. I took it because refusing would have meant fear. One night, Matteo went on, your Dante locked me in the pantry because he thought I'd stolen altar money. Which I had. Mercy, you see. He believed consequence would teach me gratitude. Instead, I got out. Father Paolo tried to stop me. I was 14 and very angry, and there was a broken bottle, and then… He spread his hands. A cold nausea moved through me. When Dante found us, Matteo said almost tenderly, the priest was dying with those beads in his hand. You can imagine the rest. He has mistaken control for absolution ever since. That was the slow mystery opening toward shape. Not complete, but enough to wound. The warehouse door slammed again. Gunfire erupted from outside. Luca swore and spun. Matteo smiled. He's punctual, he murmured. What happened next did not feel cinematic. It felt animal. Loud. Close. Terrifyingly fast. Men shouted from the loading bay. Bullets tore splinters from crates. One of the hanging lamps burst and showered the floor with sparks. Luca grabbed me as shield for one terrible second. Then Bianca appeared from the catwalk above on a bleeding leg, with a stolen pistol and fired down at him. The shot tore through his shoulder and knocked him sideways. I twisted free enough to drop to the floor. The post scraped skin from my wrists. Matteo vanished behind stacked shipping pallets, laughing under his breath like someone at theater. And then Dante was there. No flourish, no name shouted. Just his body entering the chaos with the awful efficiency I had seen at the estate and hoped never to see again. He shot one man through the throat, disarmed another with the butt of his gun, and kept moving toward me with murder arranged around purpose. I tried to get to my feet. Failed. He reached me as Luca did from the other side. For one split second, all three of us occupied the same breath. Luca looked at Dante and said, with blood down his shirt, You made me disappear behind you for 10 years. Dante's face did not change. You chose that. Then Dante shot him. Center chest. Luca stumbled back into the support beam, eyes wide not with pain but with the stunned betrayal of a man who had spent too long believing his grievance made him intimate. He looked at me once, as if asking whether I understood him now. I did. That was the tragedy. Then he died. Dante cut my wrists free. His hands shook once. Only once. You're hurt. So are you. Answer me. I'm alive. His forehead touched mine for half a heartbeat, desperate and wordless. It was more intimate than a kiss could have been. Above us, Bianca screamed. Matteo had her by the throat at the catwalk rail, gun to her temple. Brother, he called over the gunfire, you always did arrive just after the interesting part. Dante went still in the way of men deciding which loss they can live with. Bianca saw him, saw me beneath him. Some exhausted understanding crossed her face. Then she looked at Matteo, smiled with blood on her teeth, and said, "He never loved either of us enough for this to work." Matteo shot her. The sound split the warehouse in two. She fell without grace, white dress and dark hair and blood, and hit the lower crates, hard enough to vanish from sight. Something changed in Dante then. Not rage, worse. Resolution stripped of everything human except purpose. I grabbed his sleeve. Don't. He looked at me. I had never seen eyes so empty and so full at once. Come back, I whispered. It was not a command. It was a plea too, exposed to survive dignity. His hand covered mine once, crushingly brief. Then he went after his brother into smoke and iron and the red howl of the harbor alarms, and I knew with sick certainty that one of them was not walking out the same. The final battle happened under floodlights and rain. Harbor yards are ugly in daylight. At night, under emergency lamps and sirens, they become something biblical, stacked metal containers like tombs, slick concrete reflecting red and blue, cranes frozen overhead like mechanical saints who lost interest in salvation. Sophia found me first. She came through a side door with two men, took one look at my wrists, my split lip, Bianca's blood on my sleeve, and handed me a spare pistol without comment. Can you shoot? Badly. Good enough. Bianca, Sophia's face tightened by less than a breath. Later. Then we were moving through the container lanes after the sound of gunfire. I should have stayed back. I know that in the clean, reasonable part of memory. But there was no clean part left. Dante had gone after Matteo alone because that was the sort of choice men like him mistook for protection, and I had already decided at the Olive Gate that I would not survive this story by standing still. We found them in lane 17 between refrigerated units humming cold into the rain. Matteo had Dante against the side of a rust-red container with a knife in one hand and Dante's black rosary wrapped around the other like a trophy stolen in motion. Dante's gun lay somewhere in the puddles. Blood ran from Matteo's mouth. More from Dante's side where the old stitch line had reopened. They looked less like brothers than like two endings arguing over whose turn it was. You were always better at carrying guilt, Matteo was saying. I was always better at using it. Dante drove his forearm into Matteo's throat and slammed him back into the steel. The clang rang out through rain and sirens. Matteo laughed even while choking. Sophia lifted her weapon. I caught her sleeve. No. Because if she shot now, maybe she hit Dante. Because if anyone ended this but him, some part of him would stay trapped in it forever. I knew that without knowing how. Sophia looked at me once and understood enough to lower the barrel by an inch. Matteo saw us then. His gaze cut to me. Smiled. Ah, he called. Mercy came. Bad move. Dante hit him so hard, the knife flew. Matteo staggered, slipped in the rain, and went to one knee. Dante picked up the fallen blade before his brother could reach it. For a second, he stood over Matteo exactly the way I had once seen him stand over a traitor tied to a chair, calm enough to terrify the air. Matteo looked up through wet hair and blood and said the one thing designed to cut deepest. He begged for you, you know. The priest. Even dying, he thought you were the better brother. I saw Dante flinch, tiny, fatal. Matteo lunged. I fired. The shot hit Matteo high in the shoulder and spun him sideways. Not clean, not killing, but enough. Enough for Dante to catch him by the coat, enough for the blade to turn, enough for the two of them to collide against the container wall in one final brutal knot of history. When it ended, Matteo was on the ground. Dante was kneeling over him with the knife buried low beneath the ribs. Rain washed the blood away almost as fast as it came. Matteo looked down, then up at Dante, astonishment giving way to something stranger. Relief, maybe, or vindication that the last man he could still wound had finally become him. You see, Matteo whispered. There you are. Dante's face gave him nothing, but I knew the cost anyway. It moved through the space like weather. Matteo smiled once more, small and terrible. Then he died. No one spoke for several seconds. Container yards amplify silence in odd ways, the hum of refrigeration units, rain ticking on steel, distant sirens swallowed by open water. Somewhere nearby, a wounded man cried out for a medic and another voice answered in Sicilian. Dante stayed where he was. I went to him. Sofia did not stop me. He still held the knife. The black rosary hung broken from Matteo's fist, several beads scattered in the puddle like teeth. I crouched carefully in front of Dante and touched his wrist. He looked at me as if from very far away. It's over, I said. His gaze dropped to my mouth. My bruises, my shaking hands. No, he said quietly. Not for Bianca. The name hurt, because it should. Sofia stepped in then, voice level despite the grief roughening it. She's alive. All three of us looked at her. Critical, she added, but alive. The medic team stabilized her. Air left Dante's chest in a way I had never heard from him before. Not relief. Exactly. More like punishment deferred. He released the knife at last. Only then did I see how badly his hand was cut, where the rosary cord had bitten deep into his palm during the fight. Without thinking, I reached down and began gathering the scattered black beads from the rain, one by one. He watched me do it. That was the thing about us now. He no longer mistook my softness for ignorance, and I no longer mistook his violence for the whole of him. When I had all but one, I found the loose bead he had given me at the seawall still in my coat pocket. I set it in his cut palm with the others. His fingers closed. A small sound came out of him then. Not quite pain. Something older. Sofia turned away to give us privacy in the middle of a murder scene. It was absurd. Human. Perfect. Dante rose with blood on his shirt, rain on his face, and a piece of himself missing that he would never recover. He looked at the container lights, the bodies, the men who had followed him into hell and back. Then at me. It is over, he said. And this time, for the city, if not for us? It was. 8 weeks after the harbor, the estate learned how to sound alive again, not safe. Never that, but alive. Workers repaired the chapel windows with old glass imported from Naples. The generators were replaced. Sofia began sleeping more than 3 hours at a time, though she denied it with offense. Tommaso survived surgery, flirted terribly through recovery, and finally got Maria to kiss him only after she called him an unbearable idiot and threatened to dump minestrone on his head if he bragged about it to anyone. He bragged to everyone. Bianca lived. That fact altered more rooms than people admitted. She left Palermo under guard before she could walk without pain and sent one letter to Dante that he burned unread on the courtyard brazier at dawn. I watched the paper curl into black and did not ask what mercy looked like when it was finally exhausted. My father reopened the bakery in a new location 3 streets farther inland. No explanation for the anonymous investor ever appeared. I did not ask about that either. And I stayed. Not in the locked guest suite, not even in the West Wing. I moved into a smaller room above the old library that smelled like cedar shelves and sea wind and held just enough of my clothes to look like a choice instead of an accident. Dante never asked me to make it official. That would have been easier. Instead, he let it become true in dozens of ordinary ways. My tea appearing on the breakfast tray beside his coffee, a key placed silently on my dresser for the garden gate. Sofia informing the guards that if Miss Russo was carrying flour, they would not search her bags again unless they enjoyed unemployment. Tommaso claiming my desserts had repaired morale across 3 districts. We did not speak of love. We spoke around it, through it, inside it. Some nights Dante came to the conservatory after everyone slept and stood on the other side of the marble, while I worked sugar into impossible shapes. Some nights he said almost nothing at all. Sometimes he touched my wrist to turn my hand away from a hot pan and left his fingers there 1 second too long. Almost. Always. Almost. Until late September, when the first cooler wind came off the sea and found us in the courtyard after dinner with the lamps lit low and the fountain talking to itself in the dark. Tommaso and Maria had just left, still arguing about whether Basil counts as a personality. My father was gone. Sophia was on the wall walk. The night tasted faintly of lemons and smoke. Dante sat across from me at the stone table. Jacket off, sleeves rolled. His hand rested near a small velvet box I had pretended not to notice for 12 full minutes. "You're making that very obvious," I said. He looked at the box as if it had offended him personally. Tommaso wrapped it. "That explains the ribbon." "It does." A smile escaped me. "Are you nervous?" "No." "You're lying." He considered. "Yes." That startled a laugh out of me. "It also broke something open." A fountain went on talking. Somewhere in the house a clock struck 10. Dante reached for the velvet box and then stopped, as if the object mattered less than the next sentence. "This is not a fairy tale," he said. "I know. You would not wear white in one." "I definitely wouldn't." His mouth shifted. Then he said the thing under the thing. "If you stay, Elena, there will be nights when I leave and don't tell you where. There will be parts of my work I do not bring back to your table. There will be men who hate you because you matter to me." "I know. You could still choose differently." I looked at him across the courtyard lamp glow, at the scar in his brow, the cut line in his palm where the rosary had bitten deepest that night in the yard. The man who had not once told me what to feel, only what his world cost. "You offered me the gate," I said. "I remember." His eyes changed then, darkened. "Yes." I walked back. "Yes." I stood before my courage could fail me and came around the table. Stopped close enough to feel the cool of his night air and the warmer line of his skin under it. "I'm not here because you kept me," I said, each word expensive. "I'm here because I've seen what you are when no one is looking, and because sometimes, when I'm with you, the worst things I remember stop being the only things in the room." He went completely still. I had never said so much so directly. It felt like stepping out over open water. His hand rose, stopped beside my face. Almost. I leaned the smallest fraction into it. That was all it took. His palm cupped my cheek with such impossible care that my throat tightened instantly. He looked at me like a man touching fire after a lifetime underground. "Mercy," he said. "Not cold now. Not ownership. Recognition. Gratitude. Ruin." Then he kissed me. Not hard. Not with the violence we had postponed into legend. Slow. Warm. A question asked by a man who had earned the right to ask and still feared the answer. I made a sound into his mouth I had no name for and felt his control break by a single breath before he gathered it back again. When he rested his forehead to mine, both of us were shaking. "You make this difficult," he murmured. "I think that's your fault." "Probably." He opened the velvet box. Inside was no giant display, no vulgar apology for power, just a ring of old gold with a single dark diamond, antique and slightly imperfect. "My mother's," he said. "The only thing of hers I kept." I looked at the ring. Then at him. "This is a proposal? This is me failing to disguise one." I laughed and cried at once. Again. Apparently that was a habit now. "Yes," I whispered. He slid the ring onto my finger with a hand that had killed for me and built rooms around me, and somehow still trembled at this. Then he kissed my knuckles over the old gold and said, almost softly enough to miss, "You're mine to leave free." The second use, the last, earned. I sat in his lap after, because propriety had long since surrendered, and we listened to the fountain and the city beyond the walls while his thumb stroked the ring once. Then again, nothing exploded, no one bled, and the quiet felt almost radical. 9 months later, the bakery smelled like oranges, espresso, and warm sugar before sunrise. We had moved it twice, not because of threats, because success turned our first new location into a hallway with ovens. By spring, Russo and Salvatore Pasticaria sat on a corner near the old market with blue shutters, polished brass handles, and the line out the door on Sundays for maritozzi dusted with pistachio and cream. My father complained about prosperity as if it were a rash. Secretly, he adored it. I stood at the central work table in the half-light, tying parchment around a delivery box while the mixer turned meringue beside me in soft white folds. Flour ghosted the front of my dress. The ring on my finger flashed every time I reached for ribbon. Outside, Palermo was waking in layers vendors, calling over crates of blood oranges, scooters whining through narrow streets, church bells rolling over stone roofs still damp from the night sea air. Behind me, the bakery door opened. No bell. Just the little draft that came first, then the sound. Click. Soft. Dry. Familiar. I closed my eyes for 1 second before turning. Dante leaned against the doorframe in a dark overcoat with rain on the shoulders and the black rosary moving slow through his fingers. He looked exactly as dangerous as the first night I saw him, and entirely different too. There was silver at one temple now if the sun caught it. More at peace, maybe, if peace can ever fully fit a man who built himself out of controlled violence. He took in the room. The racks. The orange peel drying by the window. Me. "You're early," I said. "You say that every time." "Because every time it's true." He crossed the floor, stopping at my shoulder. Not speaking yet, just looking down at the pastry box under my hands. Inside, under a lid I hadn't tied closed, sat 12 small dark chocolate domes glazed to shine like lacquer. Bitter shell. Rose cream center. Burnt sugar thread on top. He knew the dessert immediately. His gaze lifted to mine. "It's not for us," I said too quickly. He looked unconvinced. "It's for Sophia," I admitted. "She's finally meeting that magistrate she pretends to hate." One corner of his mouth moved. Progress. 9 months and I still measured my happiness in fractions of his mouth. He set the rosary on the table. The beads clicked against the wood. The same sound that had opened my fear in his study and later steadied me on a seawall, and once, in the middle of the night, lulled our daughter. I stopped. No, not daughter. Not yet, see? Human minds wander toward futures they are not sure they are allowed to want. Dante touched the ribbon in my hand. Crooked. It is not. It is. I looked down. He was right. Of course he was. One loop leaned slightly lower than the other. I adjusted it. He watched my hands, and I knew that look now. Not hunger alone. Not even tenderness alone. Memory. Bookended. "You're doing it again," he said. I frowned. "Doing what?" His thumb traced the edge of the parchment, then my knuckles, then stopped there, taking the thing that isn't yours to repair and fixing it before anyone asks. The room went still. Chapter 1 lived in the space between us. Blood on white linen, a dying traitor. My stupid, kneeling mercy. The exact fracture line that had found him then and never stopped finding him. I swallowed. It's crooked ribbon, not moral philosophy. No. His gaze stayed on my hand. It's you. There it was. The why her, named all the way through. I could have laughed it off. I almost did. Instead I said, because ordinary mornings deserve honest things too. It still costs me sometimes. He looked up. My head, I said quietly. The rushing in. The feeling that if I don't move fast enough, someone disappears. Dante's face changed with old grief and newer helplessness. That won't leave, I said before he could lie. I know. No. His hand covered mine fully now, warm and scarred. But you don't carry it alone anymore. The simplicity of that nearly undid me. From the front room, my father shouted, "If no one brings me the ricotta in 10 seconds, I'll assume this marriage has ruined everyone." I laughed with tears suddenly threatening, which was rude of life on a Tuesday morning. Dante's gaze softened openly now. A rarity still precious enough to hush me. Mercy. The nickname settled around me, with all 12 chapters of our life inside it. Cold once, then careful, then beloved. I reached for the rosary on the table. The black beads slid over my fingers with their soft, familiar click. In Chapter 1, I had watched that motion from across a room and feared what it meant. Now I looped the cord gently around Dante's wrist and tied it there where the old scar crossed his palm. Same gesture, different weight. He looked down at my hands as if I had done something ceremonial. "Stay for coffee?" I said. I canceled 2 meetings. For coffee? For this. He touched my ring, the flower on my dress, the bakery warming around us, the ridiculous holiness of an ordinary.